What are we going to talk about? We just heard about regulation in the last session. Who's big fans of regulation out here, right? Yeah. Right. Wow. Okay, that was meant to be a joke. You people, you really do. I mean, I don't know if you can tell by the way my funny accent. I'm not from these parts, so this whole European regulation thing, after living on the continent for 17 years, it's still a bit strange to me. But maybe this next panel can change my mind. It is going to be led by Mathieu. Did I say? I said it pretty correct, right? It's a pretty. I'll let you say it. But we're going to be talking about regulation for growth. Can the EU lead in setting global tech standards? Please put your hands together for Mathieu. Come on up here. It's all yours. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's actually Mathieu Pollet, and I'm a tech journalist at EURACTIV. We will be talking indeed about the EU and its approach to take the global lead in setting standards, but please welcome our panelists today. I will try to be as entertaining as my predecessor, but he set the bar quite high, I have to say. Please. Hi, thank you to the three of you for joining today. I will do a short introduction, and then we can go into details about the topic. I will start with Helen Köpman from the European Commission, where you work, if I'm right, as the head of unit at DJ Connect, right, for digital innovation and blockchain. Thank you very much for being here. Benedikt Blomeyer, you're the director of EU policy at Allied for Startups, which is a worldwide network, right, of advocacy organization focused on improving the policy environment for startups. Thanks a lot for being here. And then finally, and I hope I don't get your name wrong too, Dex Hunter-Torricke. Torricke, fair enough. So you're the Vice President of Global Communication at Facebook and Instagram Oversight Board, right? Very happy to have you with us today. I propose we start without further ado because time flies already. I was meaning to ask maybe to kick off the discussion and before really entering into the details, what does it take to be a global leader in setting tech standards, and most importantly, maybe does the EU have this, whatever it takes? Maybe we could start with you, Helen.
Thank you for the question. I think to be a leader in tech standards means that you need to lead, right? You have to be first somehow and set the scene, set the market, set the landscape for our industry. So I think this is what EU actually has done and demonstrated the last 2 years with setting up quite a lot of regulation in the space of internet and all service providers that we see coming in this space. And we have seen a quite a flourishing innovation the last years, which is really welcome. And that's nothing we want to stifle with putting regulation there. The regulation is about establishing the rules of the game, and both for big and small actors, also creating more of a level playing field, and the advantages that perhaps larger players have had in the past and in a long time could be more equalized. Sorry for my hair in a way, and then also, of course, putting in place enforcement about that. So it's about regulation. It's not communication. It's really about rules, and that needs to be enforced. And hopefully, with that, we can continue talking and continue to have innovation flourishing.
Benedikt?
Yeah, I think I'm good as well. Yeah. For our members, it's really important to note that making rules is not an end in itself. What's the goal behind this? And for us, the goal for making rules should be that we make a clear and unambiguous legal framework where it's easier to start and scale up in Europe once the rules are there than before. I think that should be the benchmark we should be testing the rules we're making against.
In the military, there's this phrase, facts on the ground. There are the things you can do to shape a strategic environment, which involve having a very well thought out plan. And of course, I think that's where you have things like the framework for action that the European Union has created, absolutely positioning Europe to be a leader globally. But when it comes to building that leadership so that it endures over the long term, you also need to think about what are the facts on the ground? What are the things that we need to do to really create that enduring reality? And the truth is, European tech leadership depends on more than just the rules. It also depends on innovation. That is where the bulk of the facts on the ground in the tech industry are going to come from. It's going to be empowering a lot of startups to build amazing innovations that go and create the rules, create the opportunities for us to go and create rules. So I do think thinking about Europe's leadership in the world means thinking about that framework, and Europe's off to a great start there. You know, things like the DSA have absolutely positioned it to be a leader, but it also means thinking, what are the other innovations, you know, in the regulatory space that can also accompany that and that can strengthen that leadership. So, you know, I'm at the Meta Oversight Board, and we're focused on advancing this model of independent regulation of social media. And like that's something where we very much see a lot of synergies with the DSA, but it's an example of actually putting the burden on private industry to go further in really creating value for consumers, advancing transparency, and so on.
To address, of course, innovation. But before we get to that, Benedikt, you talked about benchmark. And I think one of the benchmark for standards for Europe is obviously GDPR. So I was going to ask maybe what has made GDPR a benchmark for data protection globally, and more importantly, maybe will the EU be able to replicate this achievement with the Data Act for non-personal data? And I'm going maybe to start with Dex and Benedikt this time, because I understand that there were that some industry players were not so happy with the European Commission proposal. So what are the concerns?
I think the big concern isn't with the long-term objectives of the Act. I think there's a lot there, which is very much common sense. And I think, going back to GDPR, I think that's why people, received it generally really well, because it, of course, reflected a lot of the prevailing attitudes that both consumers and industry and policymakers all shared. I think the challenge comes in with really the implementation. So, of course, the vast majority of innovation and growth and jobs in the tech industry comes from smaller players. It's not just big tech. A lot of the conversation in the regulatory space naturally gravitates towards what Silicon Valley is doing and the biggest Silicon Valley firms. But really, for Europe to be a leader, you need to empower that ecosystem, that vast constellation of smaller and medium-sized enterprises who are creating that next wave of innovation. And how much of a burden these new regulations could potentially put on those firms in terms of compliance, that's an open question, right? Like there's some studies out there which show that the average startup would end up paying hundreds of thousands of euros in compliance costs, and that's resources that could obviously be put towards advancing the innovation. I think there are also some questions around privacy. There's a notion that potentially data could be accessed by public bodies in exceptional circumstances. What exactly that means, I think, is an important thing. And obviously, in the rush to create this framework, we should absolutely make sure that privacy remains, top of mind.
I mentioned at the start, rules should lead to be clear and unambiguous and lead to legal certainty. And the GDPR definitely harmonized the legal framework across Europe. And there's a lot of advantages. And startups now become GDPR compliant once in Europe, and they don't deal with different privacy frameworks across the continent. But it's not just been an unambiguous success story. Look about the startups or businesses which are transferring personal data. It's not clear and unambiguous if European courts have to, cast judgment and interpret EU law every other year. So there we still see room for improvement. And I think we have to be important so that the audience understands that the Data Act is about the free flow of non-personal data, which many of our members still think is a bit of an undefined, unspecified subject, and we are still in the process of understanding fully what some of the provisions on international data flows of non-personal data will mean for startups which tell us, hey, I have a developer in India, I have a marketeer in Brazil, and this is great. I'm able to tap into the global economy. That's something we should make sure comes out stronger, ideally, with the Data Act, and not be hampered in any way by legal obstacles.
Helen, I have to ask, do you hear these concerns at the Commission?
Of course we do. I hope you can hear me. We hear the concerns, and we have continuous discussion with the industry, both small and large, but in particular from my perspective with the smaller ones. And of course, we already mentioned it, it's about the implementation. It's really about how you implement those regulations. that is the crux. I mean, they have good intentions. Technology changes in a way that it becomes obsolete. I'm sorry about this. Okay, wait. Hope you can hear me. All right. Yeah, that's better. That's better. So the provisions are very important how they're implemented. I just wanted to comment on the second part of your question, which was on the Data Act, which I think is very interesting. As you said, it's not about personal data. It's more about non-personal data, and in particular industrial data. The latest proposals that the Commission put on the table on the Data Act is really opening up the data flows between machines and tools, the Internet of Things, and creating a more fluid and liquid data market. And I think this is creating a lot of opportunities. Yes, there are compliance costs for sure for everyone, but opportunities are also given with the regulation if implemented correctly. Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing on the industry side of things is that we also need to include more companies and startups into this effort. How do we bring them to the table? Yeah. Benedikt, maybe.
Yeah, well, thanks for making our pitch. But no, that's part of the reason why, if you're thinking back to the concrete example of the privacy shield invalidation, let's be honest, this is not the big companies. They figured this out and they use alternatives. But it's the startups who have been relying on Privacy Shield and are now scrambling to find alternatives / left in a bit of a legal limbo. It should be the kind of startup tests and scale-up tests that we should hopefully include to EU legislation planning going forward to complement an SME test. To make sure that we're seeing these things through the lens of a startup. And then secondly, I'm all about making sure there's more startups at the table, especially in a post-COVID world. I think actually these conferences are more necessary than before COVID because I don't know if on talking to entrepreneurs around town, most of them have forgotten why Brussels matters and why the policy discussion matters. I think it's even more important post-COVID to bring these folks in. And so thanks also for putting this in the focus of the panel.
And Helen, not so long ago, the European Commission put forward its new strategy for standardization. And I think it's one of the guideline is also about this, including the companies and even small businesses, right?
No, it's crucial. I understand it's difficult. The standardization strategy is about advancing the EU's positions in the standardization bodies that actually creates and opens up market if done in the right way. It's so important that the smaller companies, which actually brings all the innovation, is there and injects their thinking into what standards should include. And I do understand this is a lot of work, and larger players, larger industry, they have a lot of resources to spend on this. And I would just encourage those that thinks that they have a global market to address, that they should look into this. I think we need to put in place some support measures for this to happen. We do look at inclusion more on SMEs in these committees and bodies that are so important, as actually financing their participation in committees, because I think it's a lot about that, finding time and travel and so on. But we really encourage, and we need the European innovators in more actively involved in the standardization, just to ensure that we have our values included in that work.
Yes.
Can I just very quickly add one point on? One thing we've been very supportive of the European Commission doing is obviously the EU regulation is the stick approach, and there's also been carrots, and we also love seeing some carrots, like for instance, identifying best practices that work in startup ecosystems across Europe, putting them in a charter, like the Startup Nation Standard, and encouraging European member states to sign up and implement them. Oh, there's, if you're looking at the title of this, Can the EU Lead? Well, the European Commission has also put forward the Startup Nation Standard, and there's a lot out there for member states to take on and follow the EU's leadership, so to speak.
Dex, do you also feel that any standardization effort needs to be industry-led?
I mean, you have to have a very close partnership with the industry, and I think that's exactly what the EU has been doing. I don't think anyone is approaching this thinking, Brussels is going to be doing things in a vacuum. And of course, by partnering with industry, that's where the Commission has already had the greatest success. And all I can say is, only having to carry around my USB-C cable for all of my devices, I thank the Commission every single day.
And if we open up this discussion about cooperation, to what extent also is it important to have this transatlantic cooperation? And the timing is actually quite relevant, because yesterday was the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council held in Paris. And among the many deliverables, one of them was this new strategic standardization. It's really hard as a French speaker, all those. It's this strategic standardization information mechanism. So yeah, can the EU afford to go solo on such big files when it comes to, yeah?
I mean, the EU absolutely could go solo. I think it would be a terrible strategy. Just the last few weeks and months, with everything that's going on in Ukraine, have reminded all of us how fragile the West is. Democracy is under attack. We face a battle against an axis of authoritarianism in our century, and it is absolutely essential for the survival of the international liberal order that the United States and Europe partner very closely together. That is the foundation of our ability to defend democracy globally. So the idea that Europe would go it alone on something that is absolutely critical to the survival of that liberal order in the 21st century, I think that's alarming. Like, I operate very globally. I spend a lot of my time in the United States as well. You have conversations all the time with people who are very bullish about either side, either the idea of advancing European interests or US interests. And I think the last few months, certainly for me at least, in a personal capacity, I can say it has reminded us every day that we have to think of the collective democratic world and those interests, not just our own little fiefdom.
Do you have anything to...
I'm not wearing these socks coincidentally. I make a point when I go into panels. Indeed, the reality that we operate in is very different since the 24th of February. The EU is a big single market. It could perhaps go alone, but should it? Especially with how the world order has changed, we think not. I think ideally we can strive towards a liberal digital space of the liberal democratic countries, and of course the EU-US relation is center to that. And I know I would prefer that many more times than the balkanized closed splinter nets that these authoritarian regimes are building. And our members would support that any day.
Next in line in Brussels, we have the AI Act, which has been put forward as the next important set of rules to regulate a fast-growing but still untouched market. We only have like 3 minutes left, but is the EU on the good path to make it its next global standards? And maybe we can open up the conversation, because you've mentioned, of course, innovation is key also when it comes to standards, and of course standards can also help fostering innovation. But where do you put the regulation limits to make sure that works? It's a big. I'm dropping a big question on you, Helen.
To think about that, but it's for 2 minutes it's hard to address, obviously. But what I think is important now is the AI Act is out there, that there's a conversation about it. Is this the right approach? Is the risk-based approach the one that is the right? And how does that translate to what you need to do as a business? AI is everywhere. It will impact every business, I think, sooner or later. So it is very important to look at this right now, be involved in the conversation, and think about the impact.
Yeah. When we speak to entrepreneurs in our networks, who are building amazing things with artificial intelligence, they tell us, "Hey, we don't know where we're going with some of the algorithms we're building here. How do you guys in Brussels know?" So, I mean, what we're hearing a lot is about, make sure we are being cautious when we're regulating for AI. The goal has to be to make sure more startups want to come to Europe to launch and scale their business. I think that should be the barometer of success of the AI Act. We still think there's a long way to go, especially in the field of high-risk AI startups, where we feel there's a lot of conformity ex ante coming at startups, and we think there could still be a bit of a better balance there.
Thanks.
I mean, I think the AI Act, obviously, incredibly positive development. Again, how can the US and the EU work together? There was obviously the Trade and Technology Council statement last year, which I think was a sign of great progress. There's a lot more to be done. And the more that Europe is thinking about how to partner globally with other players in the space, I think we're going to end up with a much more humane and valuable set of technology standards in this space over the coming years.
I'm afraid we won't have time. I don't want to drop another big questions on you, so I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much to the three of you for taking part in this chat. Please give our amazing panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much.